everybody. I want to open this video by stating that I was not initially intending to do a full mega review of Metaphor ReFantazio. The last few months, I found myself occupied at practically all times. When I wasn't working at my day job, I was at home playing a Shadow the Hedgehog related video game. When I had finished one of those games, I moved on to writing a script, recording audio, and editing together video retrospectives about them. When I wasn't working on something Shadow related, I was hanging out with friends, trying to finish Utopia after spending half a year to watch 12 episodes. When I wasn't hanging out with friends, I was at work trying to take what time I could to do anything that wasn't related to a black hedgehog. Once I finally finished all 3 parts of my Shadow the Hedgehog month videos, I finally started on my backlog that had built up. Sparking Zero, Dragon Quest III, the Alan Wake 2 DLC, Episode Aegis, everything that had come out either before or while I was focusing on the Black Hedgehog. But Metaphor? That I knew I had to save for last. Not only was it the biggest game of the bunch, but I knew it was gonna take the longest to beat. I wanted to take a break from working on videos, from thinking so critically about whatever I was playing. And yet, once I found my way back into the shoes of Sir Will Metaphor, I just had to talk about it, okay? This game is really damn good. For the most part, I'm going to be avoiding spoilers in this review. However, I only have so much footage recorded, and as a result, there will be some visual spoilers, particularly relating to the 4th major dungeon. If you want to hear me talk about spoilers, I actually just did a spoiler cast with my buddy Spencer from the Shin Megami Tensei Network podcast. I'll be linking it in the top right and in the description, so go give that a watch after you finish up here. Last thing, because of my limited footage, not everything I show on screen is going to line up perfectly with what I'm talking about. If you hear me talk positively or negatively about something, but what you see doesn't make sense with what I'm saying or doesn't even seem that bad, it's probably because I don't have any video of it. I'm going to try my best to make it make sense, but yeah, please keep that in mind. If you watched my Persona 5 Royal review series, you'd know that while I like the story of P5, I have a lot of issues with it. Persona as a series has touched on political topics in the past, but P5 offered a much greater focus on political and social commentary. The main theme of the game was tackling societal injustice, and while a lot of it was handled well, it could also be incredibly inconsistent, both in quality and in messaging. For instance, it's wrong for women to be stripped of their sexual autonomy through the abuse of power, but also, it's funny when the almost rape victim is pressured to strip as a distraction, so long as she is so scared to do it that it results in a goofy moment. It's so screwed up how Joker is shunned as a delinquent despite the wider context of his situation. In fact, every main character is revealed to be so much more than you would assume, proving that these stereotypes are unfounded and messed up. But gay people? Nah, they'll just rape young men if they think one is cute. Hashino and his team has always tackled very touchy subjects, but they don't always do so in the best way. Because of this, I was pretty nervous about the story of Metaphor, given how it's easily the most overtly political tale they've ever told. And yet, they pull it off almost perfectly. For starters, fuck you, this game is so blatantly about race. This isn't just the most political game Hashino has ever made, it's the most political game Atlus has ever made, and I refuse to be told otherwise by people who don't want to accept that there's no such thing as apolitical art, and that maybe, just maybe, Japan isn't this apolitical paradise that doesn't care about any of the same politics we do here in the West. I know the various tribes are based on different personality types, but that was done so they could make the point that these tribes are not all like that. It's the foundation used to explicitly disprove itself. Each party member was designed to go against the assumptions and stereotypes made about their race. Hulkenberg isn't a self-absorbed, politically focused fuddy-duddy. She's a knight who is unable to move past the ways she's failed others. Heisme isn't a modest farmer who'd rather keep to his own. He actively wants to go out and change the world. He's a warrior who wants to go out and both make and encourage connections with others. Yufa isn't beholden to her religion and refuses to accept anything else. She actively questions their traditions and goes against them while still loving and embracing her faith. The entire second major dungeon happens because of racism. To take the personality types comment at face value results in the dismissal of everything this game does and is a massive disservice to its creators. Now that I've gotten my very self-serving rant out of the way, I love how Metaphor is one massive blend of everything Atlus. If someone looks at this game and calls it Persona 6, I just can't help but think they probably don't know anything else about Atlus other than Persona. Like, obviously it's here, but the story feels more akin to that of SMT, only with more of a character focus like what Persona does. In terms of presentation, archetypes are very much akin to personas, especially in how they awaken, but mechanically, they have way more in common with Atma avatars from Digital Devil Saga. Not to mention that archetypes aren't simply being summoned, they're quite literally each character transforming into them. Again, like Atma avatars. Oh man, and don't even get me started on Etrian Odyssey. Out of everything Atlus has made, I genuinely think Metaphor treats Etrian Odyssey the best. It just rolls out the red carpet and goes, "We love Etrian Odyssey." The party in Metaphor is genuinely the best in an Atlus game. Everyone feels like a real person, and not even in the way Persona characters do. Persona characters feel like real people born out of stereotypes, with the purpose of turning them into more than that. Sure, parts of the stereotype might still be true, but that's not all they are. By having the cast explicitly go against the stereotype, everyone in Metaphor ends up feeling so much more authentic. One thing I really appreciate is how everyone is nuanced and not completely virtuous. Even while the party acknowledges the injustices in society and the need for change, individual members are still heavily flawed and they're allowed to be in the wrong. These people suffer from various traumas, prejudices, and internal issues that then affects how they interact with others. Heismei has his moments where his distaste for the parapets leaks out, and he can just be a bigot. But not only does the game make sure you understand where this prejudice stems from, but it also shows him grow. I will say this growth feels underdeveloped, but I appreciate the effort all the same. Now, the only party member I'm not so hot on is Juna, and that's in large part due to her personal goals and her characterization as a singer. She's clearly aping off a stereotypical idol archetype, haha, get it? And as a result, it can be harder for her to blend in with everyone else. While Stroll seeks justice for his family and his people, Juna wants to unite the world and her music and decided to become a secret agent for an underground rebel group so she can use the experience for inspiration? I'm not going to act like every other party member isn't motivated by common fantasy tropes and motivations, but at least they fit within a fantasy setting. Juna is the only one whose motivation feels this traditionally anime, even bordering on cartoonish once you learn why she's a double agent. She's not a bad character, I still really like her. Her story just sticks out like a sore thumb when you compare it to everyone else. Beyond the obvious race stuff, Metaphor actually tackles a lot of political topics. Some of these topics, such as religion, Atlus has touched on many times before, but other ones, such as the entire political process, is brand new territory, and I really like how it's handled. Unlike past ventures, Metaphor is never hypocritical or fence city. It offers genuine nuance and empathy to the various subjects it broaches, while at the same time drawing a very clear line in the sand on what needs to happen. Sure, oppressors and the privileged can be victims of the system and deserving of sympathy and justice as well, but it doesn't excuse the horrible actions they take. The entire second dungeon is incredible and is the premier example of this approach. However, Metaphor is not perfect in its themes and commentary. While it has the right mindset, the execution can be very shaky. I know I said I wouldn't be delving into spoilers, but there's one section in particular I really want to rant about. It's at the very end of the game, so yeah, major spoilers. Skip to this time on screen if you don't want to hear what I gotta say. In the penultimate dungeon, the Skybound Avatar, one of your main objectives is to find and destroy these statues called King Servants. As you destroy these statues, you not only open the way forward, but you also free the people of the kingdom from melancholia, a form of magic that can cause people to be depressed and fall to nihilism, ultimately transforming them into the human monsters that everyone spends the entire game afraid of. Alongside freeing the people from melancholia, people also start supporting you again, slingshotting you up the political rankings and making your way back into second place in the race to be king. I hate this! What the game is telling me here is that the only reason I'm not in second place isn't because of something I did, or because of the people simply not wanting me to be king. No, it's because magic. It oversimplifies the political process and absolves both you and the people of their role in it, transforming a complicated part of politics into a literal rock that you need to break in order to win. I also think it's weirdly diametrically opposed to the ending of Persona 5, which, need I remind you, was the last game this team developed. The ending of that game was all about the importance of the everyman's role in the process of change. People weren't brainwashed into apathy, they were beaten down and willfully entered a prison of their own making. They wanted the Holy Grail to be their warden and to control them. This results in the entire final battle being one giant call to action, a statement that the only way things can change is if you don't give up and resign yourself. Life won't change if you don't make it happen. It's the refutation of an ideology that prevents anything from getting better. But in metaphor? Magic. That's the only reason why. Break a rock and change happens. The people always wanted this, they just weren't allowed to. It's not even an allegory or a statement on the public. It's just brainwashing. Sure, support for the Phantom Thieves also increased towards the end of that game, but the whole point is that they couldn't do everything. Joker shooting the Grail in the face isn't what made things better. All it did was empower the people to go out and make that change themselves. Honestly, I find the entire election aspect of the game to be very disappointing and ultimately meaningless. Throughout the game, you are constantly climbing up the rankings to be king. Your rank is affected by things like side quests, spending time with your followers, and just talking to people. All of this is bullshit and doesn't matter. No matter what, you will be in the exact spot in the rankings the game wants you to be at that point in time. You, the player, do not dictate your place in the rankings. The story does. You will be in 500th place when the game says you'll be in 500th place. You will gain support when the game says you gain support. While doing side quests does cause the number to go up, that change doesn't matter at all. The entire premise of the game is that you are running a campaign to be king, and yet you have zero real impact on said campaign. It's incredibly disappointing, especially when the idea of an RPG centered around you running for the top office in the land sounds like it has so much potential. Let me rise and fall in the rankings because of my actions, because of what I do, not because the story demands it. Okay, so spoilers are over, but I'm not done ranting. Another thing I find Metaphor doesn't fully take advantage of is the voiced protagonist. Will Metaphor should have been given more opportunities to talk, particularly towards the end. Seeing as he's a political figure, you'd think he should be the one speaking to crowds in moments that are meant to boost his popularity and campaign. However, what usually happens is Stroll steps up and speaks for him. If someone was walking by and didn't know who you were or what's going on, but did like what was being said, I see no real reason for him to not think Stroll was the one running for king. For Atlus, a voice protagonist is an incredibly rare occurrence. The decision to have a silent or voice protagonist is massive, as it shapes the story being told. Soul Hackers 2 would not be told the same way had Ringo been silent. Persona 5 would not be told the same way had Joker been just as talkative as the rest of the cast. For Will Metaphor, Studio Zero decided to go with a hybrid. Will is voiced, but the only times he speaks are when you select a single line of dialogue or on very rare occasions. Ironically, one of the best uses for a silent protagonist is to make them talk. When the entire game is spent with limited to no speaking, it opens the door to making key, pivotal moments hit that much harder by having them speak. It elevates the moment and demands the player to pay attention to what is being said by being such a rarity. With Atlus going with a voice protagonist that is mostly silent, I was hoping they would take advantage of the opportunity and use it to highlight and really emphasize the points they were trying to make, all the while offering a very organic and natural context for these moments that also helps make the argument for why this guy should be king and why the people would want to vote for him. Unfortunately, this ended up being a massive missed opportunity. I honestly think Will Metaphor doesn't benefit that much from being voiced. If he was silent in the same way as Joker, I don't think that much would be lost. Ultimately, I'm glad he's voiced, but it really doesn't feel like Studio Zero took advantage of that fact. Now, I have one last thing I want to talk about with the story. Coming away from Metaphor, I was left with a desire for more. For such a big, long game, the fact that I genuinely just wanted more of it to play speaks volumes. However, it's both a compliment and a criticism. The back half of the game goes by much quicker than the front half, and I think it comes as a result of a very blatant section of the game being cut out. You get all the setup for a dungeon. You get the payoff for a dungeon. You even get to see the dungeon in the distance. And yet, you never get to play through the dungeon. As a result, it screws up the pacing royally and makes the events surrounding it feel so much more disjointed. Characters who stood to benefit from the arc that was supposed to be here jump straight to the end, leaving their development feeling unearned. One character in particular ends up acting a certain way in one scene, then completely different in the next scene, and then they go back to how they were acting in the first scene after that. I was never wondering why they might be acting this way. I was left confused because it was just so jarring. I was never actually able to sit on it and really think about it. Another reason I really wish that dungeon wasn't cut is because it robs me of more potential gameplay, which is frankly incredible. Much like with the story, Metaphor is made up of a mixture of elements taken from throughout Atlus's 35-year-long history. Structurally, Metaphor unfolds like any other modern Persona game would. A calendar system dictates the progress of the story, setting deadlines for you to complete goals, and only allowing you to move forward on specific dates. During this time, you can perform 2 major tasks a day, usually ones that either have you exploring a dungeon, spending time with your followers to increase their bond rank, or improving your royal virtues. It's genuinely nothing new, but it's a system that works well and keeps the gameplay going at a consistent pace. It never feels like you're just wasting time, nor do I ever really feel stressed to get everything done. One of the most iconic aspects of modern Persona games are the social links, so it comes at no surprise that they made their way here into Metaphor as well. This time around, they're known as the follower system. Your goal is to increase your bond rank with each follower by spending time with them and, in some cases, increasing your social stats, now known as royal virtues, to a required level. When compared to its predecessors, there are 2 key differences that, in my opinion, make followers a much more enjoyable system. To start, there are only 8 ranks for each character as opposed to the 10 in previous iterations. The other major change is that every time you hang out with a follower, you will be ranking up with them. No more visits with no real progress made. This is without a doubt the easiest form of social links we've ever gotten, and while some might find that disappointing, I wholeheartedly embrace it. Unlike Persona 5, I was actually able to max out every follower with ease, as well as max out my royal virtues. I also completed every quest I could get my hands on, and by the end of the game, I still had plenty of time to finish the final dungeon. There's a fine balance between streamlining a game or adding quality of life features, and just missing the point so hard you destroy the original intent of the system, but I feel like the core of social links is still here with the follower system. All the tedium has just been removed, and as a result, it creates a much better moment-to-moment experience. The other half of the game has you venturing out into the wild to explore local landscapes, visit small villages, and, Atlus's bread and butter, good old-fashioned dungeon crawling. In what I'm sure is a callback to the initial concept for Persona 5, you actually have to travel all over the island country of Uchronia using your gauntlet runner, and it takes real in-game time in order to get to where you need to go. In essence, your walking boat is an extension of the social sim gameplay back in the towns, though your options are more limited. As a trade-off, a number of the things you can do can only be done while traveling, thus giving these tasks more importance. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't wish there was more to do. Past a certain point, I just defaulted to the same tasks over and over, only to get everything I could possibly want out of them, and leaving me with nothing else to work towards. The good news is that it doesn't take long at all to get to where you need to go, regardless of how many in-game days it takes, making these sections feel more undercooked than anything else. The real adventure starts once you make it to your destination and get to run around a dungeon. The dungeon layouts in Metaphor are good. A better way to put it is it's a mixed bag, but one I'm still more favorable towards. The main dungeons are, for the most part, pretty good, though there is an underwhelming amount of puzzles. The third dungeon is easily the most disappointing, which is mainly due to its gimmick. I like it, but it feels like it's used in place of making a full-size dungeon. It's technically a kind of puzzle, but it's not good enough to justify the dungeon's short length. If those sequences weren't there, you'd be over and done with this place in like 15 minutes. It'd probably be shorter than some side dungeons. Which, side dungeons, meanwhile, is where things are really hit and miss. Some I thought were a lot of fun, offering interesting layouts, mazes to explore, and secrets to find. However, a lot of them are just way too basic and unengaging. Not to mention, there's only like a handful of dungeon aesthetics. There are caves, forests, a tower, another kind of cave, another kind of forest, another tower, a third kind of cave, a third kind of forest, and oh hey look, another tower that actually has no differences from the other towers other than enemy placement. Isn't that just great? If there's any area they need to improve upon in the inevitable Metu 4, it's the dungeons. They're just way too repetitive, and the only ones that are truly engaging are the ones in the main plot. On the plus side, combat rules. It's here where Metaphor moves away from being fantasy Persona 5 and firmly draws from the rest of Atlus's catalog. Well, mostly. One of the things that helps the game stand out is its soft action-based combat. While I'd love to say this mechanic was influenced by Raito, in all likelihood, I think this is drawing from another unused idea from early in P5's development. Regardless, this action combat is a lot of fun and challenges you in a very different way than the standard turn-based combat. Here, you're given a lock-on, a string of attacks, and a dodge button, all for you to use to stun enemies and gain advantage in the beginning of battle. Once you're 3 levels higher than the enemy, you can just avoid standard battle entirely and just defeat them on the map. In the beginning of the game, I found the feel of this system to be somewhat janky and awkward, but I pretty quickly got used to it. It also helps give each archetype more of its own identity, as each one has its own unique attack string. Now, archetypes are Metaphor's equivalent of... Okay, here's the thing. Everyone calls them not personas, and as I said earlier, I agree in terms of presentation, but both narrative and gameplay-wise, they're nothing like them. If anything, they're like Atma avatars from Digital Devil Saga, but even then, I'd compare it most directly to the kinds of job systems you'd get in Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. Every playable character has an archetype, each with their own elemental affinities, and giving that character access to specific skills, whether they be attack, support, or passives. You unlock more skills for that archetype by increasing their rank with a EXP. You can unlock new archetypes as well as stronger versions of each one by spending time with your followers and increasing your bond with them. Using a currency called Magla, or Mag for short, you can then equip skills from one archetype onto another. Honestly, there's nothing about archetypes that I particularly find revolutionary or original, but it's still a really great example of a job system. Building out your party with a focus on synergy, aiming to cover for one character's failings with another, choosing skills for one character that plays off of a different party member's skills. It's all just so satisfying. My favorite lineages are without a doubt Summoner, Commander, and one I won't say due to trying to avoid talking about more spoilers. Once you get into battle, Metaphor starts to take greater influence from Shin Megami Tensei, making use of the press turn system. If you know SMT, you know the drill. You start off with 1 turn per active party member, and by hitting the enemy with their weakness, you can gain additional turns before the enemy gets to have a go at you. Enemies can also hit your weaknesses, and thus gain additional turns of their own, requiring you to change up your party's makeup and stay on your toes in combat. It's a system first created all the way back in 2003, and has remained practically unchanged for a reason. It's incredible. Sure, Atlus has created different variations of it, but when you really look at each scenario, it's always a new system bolted onto press turn while leaving the core system the way it always has. Metaphor's version of this system is great, but there are a few quirks that keep it from beating out SMT5 Vengeance, and it all comes down to execution. First off, Synthesis. Synthesis is Metaphor's press turn add-on, and basically functions like a team-up attack that uses MP from every involved party member, as well as 2 or more press turns. What Synthesis skills you have access to is dependent on who's active in your party, as well as their archetype. As is, Synthesis is very solid and offers a nice risk versus reward. Exchanging turns for super powerful abilities is a fair trade-off, but unless otherwise specified, it can still fall prey to the rules of press turn. My main problem with this is based around the UI. You see, you can usually perform one synthesis skill with multiple combinations of party members, all of which are presented to you in a list. But rather than letting you pick what move you want to use and then pick which party members you want to use, instead, a single move is listed multiple times for every possible combination. This list system is still usable, but it gets really messy towards the end of the game as you unlock more and more synthesis skills. It's not a huge problem, but for a game that feels optimized in most other areas, this one part comes off really amateur. Another issue I have with Metaphor's combat is something Shin Megami Tensei has been doing for a very long time now, and I've been begging for Atlus to implement in all of their games. The ability to skip animations at will. Whether it be your animations or the enemy's animations, SMT lets you skip everything. It enables you to experience the encounter on your own terms and at your own pace, letting you pick and choose what you want to see and what you don't on the fly. Metaphor puts one foot in the circle while leaving the other one out. Sure, you can skip animations during your turn, but during the enemy's turn? Nah, you gotta sit through all of that and just deal with it. What makes this worse is when you're trying to restart the battle for whatever reason, you have to sit through the enemy's turn before you start over, adding some seriously unnecessary tedium to what is ultimately a lost cause. Screw up your first turn in battle? Here, let me rub salt in the wound by forcing you to watch the enemy wipe the majority of your team in a turn that won't even matter once they're done. Oh, yeah, you can also restart your current battle anytime you want. It's a great quality of life feature that usually saves you a lot of time. I do wish there was an option to change up your party makeup at the same time. I had way too many instances where I went into battle with the wrong setup and had to let myself die before I could fix that. But beyond that, no notes. I hope this also becomes a standard feature in future Atlus games. I see no real downsides to it. Now, there is an issue I have that's technically my fault, but screw you, I'm gonna complain about it. It's way too easy to overlevel yourself. Much like with Persona, you are meant to manage your resources, with the ultimate way of restoring everything being to leave the dungeon and come back another day. This has led to one-day challenges being a thing for some players. Unlike Persona, however, Metaphor offers a method to aid in this. By switching to the mage archetype, you can regain 1 MP at a time by killing enemies on the field. Just find an enemy spawner and spam the attack button. It's a fair trade-off. If you don't want to leave the dungeon, you don't have to, but you will have to waste some time hitting one button for a long time. It's monotonous, but it's fair. However, you also still gain experience while doing this, leading to you leveling up while farming MP. As a result, if you want to regain your MP, you're also gonna have to accept that you'll likely be so overleveled that every enemy you come across will die in 2 hits on the overworld. Of course, I could just not do this, but I wish there was a way I could make use of the mage archetype's biggest passive advantage while not ruining the challenge of the dungeon I'm in. Honestly, the more I think about it, practically all of my praise for the game relates back to the pacing. Even my criticisms tend to relate back to it. Metaphor is able to balance story and gameplay perfectly, a massive improvement over Persona 5. In P5, it felt as though I wasn't allowed to play the game unless there was a palace and a deadline set. When there wasn't, I was locked into hours upon hours of story and cutscenes. The beginning in particular was awful, constantly teasing you with tutorials that hold your hand and presenting you with false starts. Meanwhile, Metaphor gets going much faster and never lets its story become overwhelming. By the time the first deadline is set, you've already fought a handful of bosses and ran through a couple of mini dungeons where you were allowed to just play the game without feeling like it was holding your hand. From there, this balancing act doesn't stop, making sure that for every minute of story, you get 5 minutes of gameplay. The closest it ever comes to trapping you with hours of cutscenes is once towards the end of the second act. But even then, it's like 2 hours? At most? Sure, 2 hours is still a lot of time, but considering how freeing the rest of the game felt, I was willing to sit down and let a story just be told for a while. Not to mention, it happens right around the time you witness the gaping hole where a dungeon used to be, showing that there was clearly the intent to help balance that section out. Before I end this review off, I have a few more things I want to make note of. 1, music is great, no notes. I love how everything is sung in Esperanto. Not only does it make it memorable, but it's also a lot of fun to poke fun at the goofy cadence. 2, voice acting is phenomenal. However, I feel like Will Metaphor is a little too neutral in his direction. Every time he speaks, it feels like he lacks the context of the conversation. What he's saying makes sense, but how he says it just doesn't feel right. I also think it's ridiculous that followers are not fully voiced. I know Persona 3 Reload started development after Metaphor, but that game has set a standard whether Atlus likes it or not. And finally, number 3. Man, the art direction in this game is so good. The town hubs are beautiful, and the UI is just as striking as Persona 5's. At first, I found it overwhelming with just how many moving parts there were on screen, but with time, I got used to it and fell in love. Anyway, why is this game butt ugly half the time? It looks like a PS3 game, likely in part because it was made with the P5 engine, aka an engine made for a PS3 game. Anytime you're in a location that isn't a city, ruins, or something with a bunch of tight corridors, I'm left marveling at some of the ugliest landscapes I've seen in recent years. Every time I go out on the Gauntlet Runner, I am guaranteed to see some truly hideous landscapes, so long as I'm not out in the middle of the damn ocean. I understand it probably needs to look this way in order for the frame rate to stay consistent, but I've seen way more visually complex areas in other anime games. This is just unacceptable, and I fully believe it's entirely because of the game's engine. It just feels so dated. In conclusion, Metaphor ReFantazio is incredible. There is no other way to put it. From its characters, to its story, to its combat, to its world, it's all just so superb. Yeah, it has its shortcomings, but it's easily one of the best games Atlus has ever made. It's the culmination of everything that is Atlus. A company that is simultaneously incredibly influential, yet only recently entered the mainstream. A company so beloved, yet so underappreciated. A game 35 years in the making, and it honors every single one. Hello there! Thank you all for watching this unplanned mega review of Metaphor ReFantazio. Initially, I was planning on making a video for the anniversary of P3R, but coming away from Metaphor, I just had to completely upend my video schedule. I still have that video coming, it's just been rearranged for the time being. If you enjoyed what you saw here and want to see what else I have coming, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of all of my future videos. If you want to support what I do here, why not check out my Patreon or become a YouTube member? If you do, you'll be getting early access to all my videos, as well as your name in the credits. I also stream here on YouTube semi-regularly, whether it be me playing a game and talking with chat, or what I like to call The Demon Haunt, a new show where I sit down with my co-host Gravesaka to talk about whatever gaming or pop culture news we want to talk about. You all have a wonderful day. I'm gonna go prepare myself to not learn what the hell is up with this planet.
God, why did I let that guy paint this place blue? He looks so much better in red. Oh well, I'll just do what a landlord should do and actually hire someone who knows what they're doing. I'm gonna go call a painter. Ugh, God, this place smells like ass!